right now, we're going into chaos. When Neptune and Saturn go into Aries, things are going to break wide open. The level of acceleration is just going to be mind-boggling. We were naturally multi-dimensional humans, and we were in contact with at least 9 to 11 dimensions. The best example of how the 9th dimension works is the Mayan calendar. When you go into the very center of the planet Earth, you are vibrating with all of the elements in the universe, and you know the Akashic records. This is the real turning point. We're in the middle of this radical level of waking up. This is information that's being withheld from us. A really ancient wisdom, technology, underground temples, tunnels going all the way from Romania to Tibet and to the Giza Plateau. What's going on in those rooms that are way under the earth? By accessing this dimensional information, we've gotten in touch with a method for healing the consciousness on the planet. We're ready now to do this. That's a great question. Almost every culture on the planet, especially Vedic cultures and Native American cultures and Mayan cultures, know that there was a great cataclysm 12,000 years ago. And in ordinary culture, people think of it as the fall of Atlantis or just the fall. But in my case, I was born into a family that's part Cherokee. We're Cherokee and Celtic. And in the Cherokee tradition, my grandfather, who was my teacher, is a record keeper. And so my grandfather was a keeper of the long records of time, basically, most importantly, over 100,000 years, but even beyond that. And so as a child, I was taught the record teachings because my grandfather knew that I would be at the right age to transmit this information when our culture, when the world went into crisis, which the world at this point is in severe crisis at this point, and almost everybody knows that. And so it's kind of easier to say things than it used to be. But what happened to us is because of the intensity of the cataclysms, we were naturally multi-dimensional humans. And we were in contact with at least 9 to 11 dimensions, if not more. The Pleiadians, who I work with, are mainly interested in the first 9 dimensions. But because the cataclysm was so traumatic, as we reawaken our multidimensional consciousness, which is what we're doing now, we're also going through layers of trauma. And so the reason it's so difficult right now to cope with world events and cope with politics and everything is just because the layers of trauma are affecting all of us very deeply and very intensely. And and in this case, like the last cataclysm 12,000 years ago, was mostly a physical cataclysm. The seas rising and glaciers and poles melting and all that stuff. And we're having some of that experience at this point, but really most of it's emotional. And if you think about your own lifetime, usually the emotional experiences are harder than the physical ones. So this is a very tough passage.
And there seems to be this nature of cycles because it's 12,000 years later. It's a very round sort of number. Can you speak to us of the cycles? Is it astrological in some ways?
Yeah, it's related to the precession of the equinoxes. We're at the half point from the cycle of cataclysms, which occurred during the Age of Leo, and now we're going into the Age of Aquarius. So it is related to precession, and a lot of the Vedic teachers have done a very good job relating the Vedic cycles to the precessional cycles. So we do understand an awful lot about the timing at this point. And I could have given you more exact figures on 12,000 years ago. So we have very specific numbers on that, but that's a little bit too complicated. We just need 12,000 years ago. It's going to do for us at this point. So now that we're at the opposite point, we're facing up, like at the time of the full moon, we're facing up to all of that energy that occurred during the Age of Leo.
And it's interesting because you're referencing the Age of Leo, but we also had the Age of Pisces. But you're saying can you explain that a little bit to me?
Well, okay, before we were in the Age of Leo, we were in the Age of Virgo, and then Virgo went into Leo. So now for 2,100 years or so, we've been in the Age of Pisces, and now we're passing into Aquarius. In fact, we are definitely in the early stages of Aquarius, and there's no turning back at this point. And so right now, at this point, now that we've actually gone into Aquarius, we're having a lot of really fascinating astrological transits related to leaving the age of Pisces and going into the age of Leo. So you and I are having a conversation at a really great time, because this is the real turning point is really 2024 through 2027. And at this point, now that we're into 2025, we are really in it. Like, and where you can really see that is like in political events in the United States. There's just no stopping this. People better just forget about anybody being able to stop anything. They're not going to be able to, because that energy is greater than any human being.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned that we previously had physical cataclysms, where this one seems to be a lot more emotional. What are some of the hallmarks that you see at the moment of coming to that conclusion?
Yeah. Anytime that we go through emotional growth, we have to go through the journey of the dark and the light. Like if you go through a physical destruction, as we did 12,000 years ago, you're just in the third dimension, which is linear space and time. And then a great big earthquake just lifts you off the top of a mountain or whatever goes on. But this one, because it's emotional and because it involves clearing and understanding the last 12,000 years of human experience. See, that's what's really fascinating. We are being called to integrate the emotional impact of 12,000 years of human experience, which is huge, you know, you know. And that's why my grandfather in Cherokee tradition, the teachings always go from man to woman and then from woman to man. So my grandfather, of course, was a man, and he was, of course, to pass the teaching on to one of his daughters. And he had three daughters. But he knew that his daughters would not be here when it really hit the way it is now. And so that's the reason I became the carrier of this tradition. And it involved a lot of emotional processing. I've done a lot of work on myself, a lot of past life work, a lot of emotional work in order to carry the force of this, because you'll have to admit this is intense.
I'd love to know more about what it means to be a record keeper, because at some point at the moment, we have a very written based society, but I'm sure way back when, in even like your grandfather's time and the people that have handed the wisdom on to him, it was more of an oral, like verbal
Yeah, that
tradition, right?
when I'm man to woman, woman to man. In our tradition, which is southeastern Cherokee in the United States, it goes back to about 5 to 700 BC. In basically pretty much in Egypt, as a matter of fact, our particular tradition. So there are, of course, many carriers of many traditions who are passing generation by generation. We hear about various teachers. The interesting thing about my grandfather was he insisted that I was to pass those teachings to the public. And a lot of other teachers are too. The Hopi teachers are doing that. And he insisted that my job, it's been quite a lifetime, was to pass those teachings on. And so that's why I do what I do. And so that's why I consider my most important work. I have around 15 books, but I consider my most important work to be Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, because we don't have an awful lot of guidance for how to open the higher dimensions in particular. A lot of people have trouble even imagining what they are. They have trouble detecting them. They have trouble decoding them and receiving the messages. But in fact, according to my work in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, it's clear that we can do this. Like, for example, the seventh dimension is the dimension of sound, which is coming from the cosmos, which is the same as the music of the spheres, according to the Greeks. And the sound becomes geometry in our world. And so that's an ancient teaching that actually, if you think about it, it's not that hard to understand. Like in the Bible, it says the word of God became the meaning of our world, you know? So one of the things I've done is I've really worked to explain these things in a way that people can understand them. So people my age thought I was crazy. And people 20 years younger than myself or 30 years younger basically thought I was completely stupid or something. But miraculously, at this point, with the 20th anniversary of this teaching coming back, because this is the third edition of this, the younger people understand it. They go, oh yeah, and then once you are able to stop thinking it's stupid or stop thinking it's a bunch of stuff that somebody made up, then you can start working with it. And this is fascinating stuff. A lot of your listeners are going to be people who have worked with sound healing and worked with crystal bowls. And, a lot of your people are going to be people who love crystals and geometry. And like, here's a beautiful icosahedron that I always work with. And when you start working with geometry and working with crystals, your consciousness really accelerates. It just does. And so we're ready now to do this, and it's really the only thing we can do against some of the potentially nefarious aspects of our world. For example, artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence could be a good thing. Any teaching or any technology that comes to us can either be good or bad. It's a matter of choice, So right now, the powers that be who want all the money and all the power, they're holding all of the AI information in the first 4 dimensions. The first dimension is the central core of the Earth. Second dimension is the space between the center of the Earth and the surface. Third dimension is linear space and time, and here we are. And then the fourth dimension is the realm of dark and light and the archetypal realm, where the yin and the yang, where things struggle for balance. And they're trying to keep all of that information basically in those first 4 dimensions. And so one of the things that I discovered after writing my own teachings from my grandfather is I discovered there are other people who have figured this out on this planet. And so one of the things I cite in the introduction of alchemy is a lot of information about things that are going on in Romania, in Transylvania, in the Carpathian Mountains, where people are discovering how to access really complex forms of information and consciousness only by means of being in the higher dimensions. There's a really interesting dynamic going on right now where AI is trying to keep it in the first 4 dimensions, which means we'll be entrapped and we'll become digital robots. Or if we open our consciousness and access all these levels from the higher levels, like sacred sound, geometry, the Pleiadian realm is the realm of unconditional love. If we access things at those levels, no system on this planet can trap us and make us robots.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. I want to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. Thank you so much. For all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the subscribe button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please take a moment, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. It helps with everything we're doing here, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. Thank you so much in advance for your support. You described the first 4 dimensions. So what's the, can we go 4 all the way up through to 9 as well? Can you take the time to explain what each of the dimensions are for us as well there?
Yeah, so let's take our consciousness. Let's go into the center core of the Earth. And when you go into the very center of the planet Earth, you are in a world which is vibrating with all of the planets and stars and elements in the universe. And you have total omniscient knowledge and you know the Akashic records. Then you bring your consciousness through the second dimension, which is an incredible activator because there you are and you have all this amazing knowledge. Like I was given this knowledge as a child, which was wonderful. And so when you go into the second dimension, that's where the elementals and the mineral beings and the earth spirits reside. And they will help you and tell you everything you know in order to be completely healthy and vital while you're alive. Then you move into the third dimension, linear space and time, where you have a life and a family and a job and all these wonderful things that we do. And we all understand the third dimension quite well. The trick is to stay oriented well in the third dimension. And this is why so many sacred teachings teach about the sacred four directions, because we need to learn to work with north, south, east, and west. We need to understand the equinoxes and solstices. There's a lot of teachings in the third dimension that we need to understand. Then when we move our consciousness out of the third dimension, and we do that because we keep seeking, what do I need to know? What do I need to understand? What does it mean for me as a human that people are dying in Gaza or people are suffering in some other place on the planet? We start to move into the realm of the dark and the light. And the fourth dimension is the archetypal healing zone. This is the place where we process, this is where we process the subconscious, the unconscious, according to Carl Jung. And as we start processing ourselves in the fourth dimension, we start working to resolve the polarities. Like instead of believing that something is right or wrong, or something, this war is a good thing or a bad thing or whatever, we start to realize that everything that's going on is actually the whole human race. And we start to connect with species consciousness to the consciousness in the fourth dimension. And then once we start to get in touch with that potent species consciousness, which also takes us back down the timelines, then our heart starts to open. And when Jerry, my husband, and I taught Pleiadian activations for 20 years, we're not doing it now. But when the heart started to open in the workshops, we always had to be very careful, because what happens is you find yourself expanding in the heart. And that's where the geometry comes in. The sacred geometry arrives to contain the power of the heart, because the sacred geometry in the universe then communicates the power of the heart to all beings in the cosmos. And then as you move into that geometry and you start to embody that geometry, and there's just all kinds of stuff you can do with that. It's more fun than anything I can think of. I love the sixth dimension. But then what starts to happen is we start to hear this distant sound. We start to hear this tone, maybe we hear music, maybe we hear an etheric sound we've never heard before. And what we're hearing the sound vibration of the seventh dimension that creates the six lower dimensions. Once we're into that sound vibration, we then open up to the divine, because the eighth dimension is above the sound, and the eighth dimension is communicating consciousness into sound that then goes down to geometry and goes down to the heart. And then the most fascinating thing about our particular teaching, this Cherokee teaching, is that the ninth dimension is time. And that's a really weird thing. I struggled with that one for 20 years, because Einstein, of course, says time is in the fourth dimension. But the ninth dimension is where the agendas that are way in higher dimensions are communicating to our planet. And the best example of how the ninth dimension works is the Mayan calendar. So Alchemy of Nine Dimensions has one of the best explanations of the meaning of the Mayan calendar, how it works, and how it's affecting us at this point. So one of the things I did in this revision, which is really important, is the second edition of this book came out in 2011, but we didn't yet know what was going on with the Mayan calendar, because then 2012 came along, then things started to fragment and fall apart. And during that period of time, by the way, I wrote a trilogy, a fictional trilogy, about people who were experiencing this shift after 2012, because I think this is not well understood, and I would like to see it be more understood, which is one of the purposes of this book. So this edition, the third edition, finally integrates the ninth dimension. In other words, it took me 3 editions to finally get to the point where all the dimensions were correct. So does that give you a good sense of those? And then we could go higher than that, but I basically am working with 9.
Yeah, right. So what does it go up to?
Well, right now, in terms of human understanding, we don't understand much beyond 9, except for a book called The Realized Light of the 12th Dimension, which is by a Canadian writer named Joshua Reichman. And so that just came out this last year. And so now we have some access to 10, 11, and 12. But I think there's many, many, many more dimensions than this. It could be, Amrit, it could be that in the angelic realms and in the high spirit realms and all that, those dimensions are just so high that we won't be comprehending them as humans. So we're going to have to go through many lifetimes to get to those levels, something like that. But that's kind of where we are right now.
What does it mean to you when this knowledge kind of drops? So, now, like you said, there's now information available on the 12th dimension. And even just, how potent you think this work is just so necessary right now, the understandings of dimensions 1 to 9 right now. Is it all like the timing of it all? What is it really? Because you said that the teaching really is about ninth dimension and really understanding time. Can you tell us about the timing? Like what's next? What's happening? Why
Yeah,
right
I know
now?
you're falling right into line with this because I can see that you intuitively understand it. And of course, Joshua Reichman's the only one who has been able to discuss it, I think, in a way that's fairly accessible. And he's a Jewish guy, and he really believes when you hit the 12th dimension, it's Christ consciousness. So his take in his book is very, very interesting to me because right now we're having such a conflict in the Middle East. And then, of course, the Age of Aquarius is probably destined to be the Age of Christ. I've always thought that was true. It's not something that anybody taught me, but I've always felt that. And so when I read his book, I realized, like, oh, sounds to me like as we go into Aquarius, these early levels of Christ consciousness are coming. And Christ consciousness isn't about any religion being any better than any other religion, because like Muslims admire Christ, Jews admire, it's not that. It's just it's a finer level of consciousness in some way that I don't understand yet.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, what do you think happens as we start to access more and more of these dimensions? Like you said, because it's okay to date you. Sorry, you said you're 82, and there's people that are like 20 potentially picking up on this information, and their receptivity is rather large, and their appetite for this information is rather large as well. And so, what does it look like as more and more people are tapping into this awareness of their multidimensionality? And what does that mean for the way we collectively navigate the world?
Well, that's an interesting question because I tried to grapple with that a little bit in the new edition of Alchemy. So the new introduction, or the additions to the old introduction, have all this information about what's going on in the Carpathian Mountains in Romania. And so I have gone deeply into all of the stuff that they're discovering, and which basically what they're working with over there and have discovered is a bunch of technology, underground temples, tunnels going all the way from Romania to Tibet and to the Giza Plateau and also into the inner earth. This is really fascinating stuff. And all that information is right there for readers and references on how you can learn more. But here's what really grabbed me on this whole thing. Jerry and I did about, maybe 500, 1,000 Pleiadian agenda activations globally between 1995 and 2010. And when you go and do a 9-dimensional activation, and all that information, how to do it, how it works, is on my website. I just give everything away when it comes in. So we came up with a ceremony for creating 9 dimensions. And then wherever we would go, the iron core crystal records were different. So we'd all sit there and we'd go down into the center of the earth, just like you and I did a little while ago, just talking. And in every location, something different was going on. And that really intrigued me. Okay. So meanwhile, with this technology that they're working with in Romania, what's going on in those rooms that are way under the earth are time machines, operative time machines. And the people who are studying this technology believe that the people who were using those time machines were between 9 and 15 feet tall. And we're talking about at least 50,000 years ago. So when I first heard about this, the first information we got on this in the States was around 2010. I went, oh, baloney. I just went, yeah, right. But I kept on persisting. So one of the things that I found in the Romanian researchers is one of the researchers used a time machine and asked the question, said, okay, what was happening in Romania 11 or 12,000 years ago? What's going on here? And he went to a ceremony back 9,000 BC where people were doing a ceremony connecting 9 dimensions with the higher cosmos and to the center of the earth. The ceremony was exactly what Jerry and I have been teaching for 25 years. So we believe at this point that by accessing this dimensional information, we think that we've gotten in touch with the method for working with the earth and healing the consciousness on the planet. I don't know, I can't find any other way to look at it. How could we, two people, in 1995 or whatever, how could we ever create? Now I scripted the ceremony and created it out of the information in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions. The information in Alchemy of 9 Dimensions came to me from the Pleiadians in 1995. And at that point, I published the information, a book called The Pleiadian Agenda. Do you remember that? New Cosmology for the Age of Light. Well, anyway, that was a really big New Age bestseller. It sold a couple 100,000 copies, just like that. So I created this ceremony out of what I got from the Pleiadians. And I've been taught as a child that the Pleiadians were like so much a part of us for 100,000 years. Now that's the Paleolithic era. And during the Paleolithic era, the Pleiadians were with us, teaching us about art and ceremony and equinoxes and all the things that go on this planet. And so we're talking about a really ancient wisdom, okay? But it would appear from everything that I can see, and as you can see, I'm kind of a pretty logical, I'm not a wacko. It looks like this is the way to relate to our planet. And if that is the case, this is one of the things that people need to do now. And I really do believe that's true. And when we were doing it, we had so much fun. I mean, the most important thing is it's fun. It really is. Like Jerry and I were teaching at Kripalu about 20 years ago. We had a circle of around 100 people. And on the last day of our workshops, we go around the circle, we'd ask each person, well, what did you experience? And then they'd tell us. We got around to the circle to this lady who was about 85 or 90 years old. And she said, I want to tell this whole group that I was one of the original people to do acid in Timothy Leary's, thing. I guess it was in Canada, his workshops. And she said, so I did the full heavy duty acid trips when I was like 20 years old. And she said, and what went on in this workshop is the same thing. In other words, there's a way. And then the other issue with the new edition of Alchemy of 9 Dimensions. I also covered the Blue Brain Project, which is a project that's been going on in Switzerland, where scientists are attempting to map the dimensions that are in the human brain by means of topology, which is a very advanced type of mathematics. And these scientists have managed to map 9 different geometries in the human brain. They're all very different. I've seen a lot of pictures of them. They do it on a great big computer. But it would appear that this is how our brains operate. This is the potential that we have in our brains. And that's where we get right back to that issue of getting smart about artificial intelligence. Are we really going to have our world run by robots that function in the first 4 dimensions? Or are we going to be multi-dimensional, highly consciousness humans? This is where we are now.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. It's really interesting to think about someone traveling back in time. It just it's really hard to ground into that. One of the pieces in there that you mentioned, or is also, you mentioned Egypt, Romania, Tibet. There's these ancient structures that we also had, which you referred to actually in the 3D. We've got these structures that are helping us anchor kind of 6D awareness and frequencies. Can you describe that a little bit to us, please?
Yeah, so the project in Romania has been basically run by the military, because once they discovered the stuff, just like in the United States, the military and secret people come in and take it over. And so in order to really understand what's actually going on here, people have to actually get into reading some of this material. The author is Radu Cinemar. And he has 7 books that are out with Peter Moon's publishing house. And the first one is Transylvania Sunrise. And people can just get Transylvania Sunrise, and that'll pretty much take you there. But the reason I'm saying, people, if you're curious, you need to get into this, is because Radu Cinema really helps us understand how the military and how the secret societies control information. Now, I've been studying that issue for my whole life, and I'm sure you have too. But his explanation, because he had to deal with it for so many years, is one of the best ones I've ever read, in terms of the high masons, all those levels that go on with this stuff. And so this is information that's being withheld from us, and then anybody who reads about it or talks about it is a nuthatch, But that's not true. And it's time to get this one.
And can you tell us more? Can I double click on the question? How 3D geometry is helping us with 3D structures are helping us anchor 6D.
That's great you go for that one, because we're in 3D, right? And you've got arms and legs and a back, and you keep on trying to keep yourself straight, and you keep on trying to make yourself walk and do yoga to keep yourself in good condition, right? Well, what happens is if you do all the stuff that you do in order to align yourself, what you're actually doing is you're aligning yourself with your 6-dimensional geometry. Because in the 6th dimension, each one of us has an ideal form for our body and for our consciousness. And all the things that people do, like dancing and yoga and Tai Chi and all those things, all of those things that they do are tremendously more enhanced if you also are aware of that six-dimensional self that exists in contact with you. See, all of those sacred teachings are ways to get people to align to the sixth dimension. That's what they're for. But also they keep us healthy, they keep us feeling good, and they keep us having a lot of energy, all the wonderful things that we'd love to have in the third dimension. And then six-dimensional geometry, if you want to go to the sixth dimension, is just a trip. I mean, you start studying sacred geometry, and you go to sacred sites and you study triangularity. And like I said, there's my icosahedron, which is the strongest geometrical form for me that I work with. And there's a lot of geometry right on the cover of Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, because that's where you really start to accelerate into higher levels. And like once you start doing that, you're not going to go back. You're going to fight hard against getting stuck in four dimensions.
And so it's really interesting. Do you see like particular, like the pyramids? What's the purpose of the pyramids then? Have you considered something like that?
Yeah, the pyramids they have to, of course, be aligned correctly in certain locations. Like the Giza Plateau, for example, is actually really the geodetic center of the Earth's surface. And that's why that powerful complex is located right there. But just relating to the pyramid is the place to start, because it's the simplest geometry that we can work with that starts to take us from being, polarized and stuck in dark and light. So the geometry gradually becomes more complex, like the topologists who were mapping the human brain found that they could only go so far with the complexity of geometry because it gets to be so complicated just beyond describing.
And so you've also mentioned that spending time studying the nine dimensions, you really understand time now. What do you mean by I really understand time now?
That's a great question, because what I used to find 20 years ago when I was learning, like with this book, the third edition, I'm reading this book for the first time with total comprehension. I have not understood it until now. So if I go back 20, 25 years, when I was working on this material, what I used to find is that the Mayan calendar was definitely part of what was going on here. I was sure of that, the timeline issue. And what I used to find with the ninth dimension is that when I would contemplate all those long cycles of time that the Mayans described, I would go on a trip that was even more intense than the sixth dimension. In other words, as we move through these, they're more artistic, they're more exciting, they're more intriguing, and they're also obviously connecting us with high levels in the cosmos. Because there's another whole level here, which is what really goes on out in the cosmos beyond Earth. And I sometimes think that it's going to require some kind of link with that more cosmic sense to get through the kind of stuff we're going through right now. Like right now, we're going into chaos, as you know. And then I can tell you as an astrologer, and in the middle of this, of course, I've been an astrologer the whole time. When Neptune and Saturn go into Aries, things are going to break wide open, which is basically a couple of months now.
March?
Like at the end of March, Neptune goes into Aries. And then in May, Saturn goes into Aries. And eventually they conjunct and they come together. And when those two planets go into Aries, just the level of acceleration is just going to be absolutely mind-boggling. And then in the Indian tradition, according to Babu Dev Misra, who's the author of the Yuga Shift. You talked to him yet? You talked to him, okay? Yeah. He says the Kali Yuga is ending in the end of March. So very end of March, right when Neptune goes into Aries. So I've contemplated that one quite deeply because I actually think it's very positive. Because as we actually move out of the Kali Yuga and start to move into a better field of consciousness, even though things are going to be radically breaking down around us, which they already are, we're going to feel differently about that once the Kali Yuga ends. A spiritual guidance function that we've had pretty much at our fingertips and probably about 400 years ago. As soon as the age of science came in, scientific materialism, most people lost their tactile contact with spirit. But I think in the end of March, that faculty is just going to return to people. And I would think what will happen for most people is they'll just feel kind of mystical. They may feel like I'm safe no matter what. They may have access to profound trust in spirit, even though things are terrible all around us.
Wowee, hey there guys. This is such a multi-dimensional conversation, pun intended, with Barbara. So what are you taking away from today's conversation? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Join in on the conversation. And also, if there's questions that you've got of Barbara that you would like asked, she's going to be back again in the future, touch wood. So leave those questions in the comments below as well. And I'd be honored to ask them on your behalf. With that, back to Barbara in today's episode. At this particular juncture, is this why, because things do generally happen in cycles, and you've mentioned that at great length in several junctures and features, but you've also said that something about this particular cycle, it seems like we're ending a cycle, is that right? And obviously the end is another beginning as well. But you said there's something different about the quality of this ending and this starting.
Well, speaking of the yugas, most people think of the yugas as just being eternally returning circles. Another yuga, another 26,000. I think of it as a spiral. And so I think that every time we come to this end point where the new beginning point with the Age of Aquarius comes, that's every 26,000 years, I think there's an uplift into that next spiral. And so that's what I think is going to somehow carry us all along as a species. Because Bibu's book is, it's not an easy read with all his hypothesis on cometary destruction. But I think he's right on.
What did happen at the end of 2012 with the Mayan calendar?
Yeah, what I noticed, and maybe you did too, first of all, a lot of amazing things happened right at the end of 2012 that were actually pretty much kept under wraps. Like, for example, the end of 2012, we had the discovery of the Higgs boson particle in the particle accelerator in Switzerland.
The God particle.
And the discovery of the Higgs boson particle proves that superstring theory is the correct theory for the universe. Now, if you think about it, alchemy of 9 dimensions is based on string theory. It's matter of fact, I'm very wide open about it. And the reason that I'm comfortable saying that is that when I channeled the Pleiadian agenda in 1995, the information came to me at the exact same time that Edward Witten wrote his superstring theory hypothesis. So I'm actually convinced that it came to him mathematically, and it came to me more as a spiritual teaching. And so as far as the end of 2012 and then going into 2013 is concerned, I found myself not knowing what to do. It was like, and I've also done a lot of work with Carl Kalaman, the author of Mayan Calendar Research. And Carl feels that the end of the cycle was 2011, October 2011, and the traditional Mayan calendar date is 2012. It doesn't make any difference. It's not a problem because what Carl was teaching better than anyone else was he was teaching time acceleration. And he was showing us how time had accelerated over 16.2 billion years. And so I've repeated in this new edition, I've repeated more of Carl's research because I think it's extremely important. And so to me, the only person who gave me a handle on what was going on was Kalaman. Because what he said was, he said, time acceleration ends October 28th, 2011. And something sure ended in 2011 and 2012, where people started drifting, people started being more amorphous. A lot of really weird social theories came into play with people showing a great deal of confusion. So my question to myself was, okay, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to create a work of fiction with characters, a group of characters who are trying to figure this out. So that's why I wrote the Revelations trilogy. I wanted to show a group of people trying to figure this out. And it's quite fascinating, really, because the whole trilogy leads right to the central issues in the Vatican. And more and more and more, I can see how much the Vatican has to do with the timelines on this planet. And I'm watching this one like a hawk, needless to say.
What do you mean by that? The central issues lead to the Vatican?
The Vatican is just a gigantic dome of secrecy. There's a central control dynamic. Like, for example, this Vatican Bank is the oldest bank on the planet now, and therefore has a stranglehold on the resources of all of the people on the earth. And so I think I wrote the trilogy to expose, and by the way, I was a Catholic convert when I was 21. So I was Catholic for 20 years. So this has been a personal issue as well as you know.
You mentioned that time has accelerated, or then time stopped accelerating. That is a pretty trippy concept for the layperson to tune into. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't feel like I understand the physics or the mathematics of that. It could be that it has something to do with the mind of God and God consciousness, where finally 2012, 2011, it was time for people to start to learn how to think for themselves. Maybe the divine entity that created us as some kind of companion and exploration of meaning, maybe that's what changed the dynamic. But don't you agree that something changed?
It definitely felt like going into 2012, a lot of the spiritual work, consciousness work, even just general health and wellness was a bit of an uphill battle. Whereas it feels like after 2012, we were running downhill. Like more and more people are open to these conversations, more and more people are open to awareness, people generally more aware, more organic food shops, like all sorts of things started to shift in my mind around that time.
Yeah. Yeah, something very fundamental change. And that's, I don't know if I understand anything more about it, but I do know that that the Mayans 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago, somehow they knew that that was the point where the shift was going to occur. Now, the Cherokee and the Maya are very aligned if you go back 1,000 years. So the Cherokee also have that record.
Where are they getting this information from? Like tens of thousands of years of like how it just boggles the 21st century mind that thinks it's so intelligent with all the information it has at hand, where, you know, a so-called primitive civilization could potentially know so much.
Yeah, what's really hard for people to do is to realize that we have been de-accelerating since 12,000 years. In other words, the contemporary scientific paradigm teaches that we are more advanced and advancing further all the time. And all anybody has to do is go out the front door and look around to decide whether that's true or not. I mean, maybe we've had enough degeneration since the end of the calendar for people to start to think more about the possibility that we were previously advanced. But anybody who studies archaeology and ancient sacred sites and ancient records on this planet will discover that the further we go back, the more advanced we were. And then there have been series of cataclysms. So the tendency is for us to build up to a certain level, which is what the yugas teach. And then finally the cycle of destruction comes in order to break down the old world so that a new world can come in.
Interesting. The end of 2012 and right now we're in 2025. You said between 2024 and 2027 is this real interesting window, and right now we're in the thick of things. Yeah, interesting to sort of see all the emotional stuff that's coming up for us. Do you think there's potentially a link between that delta of time between what happened there and where we are landing now?
Yeah, I think what's significant about this period from 2024 to 2027 is we've already actually moved into a period now where the outer planets are in really, really harmonious alignments in and out with each other. It moves in and out. But the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter, are moving into alignments of sextiles and trines. And it's gradually building and kind of creating a harmonium. So in the middle of this outer planet structural harmonium that's building and developing, and it's so complicated that what I've been doing with it is I thought, what am I going to do with this? And I've decided, okay. So on my website in spring of 2023, I started giving free analysis of the equinoxes and solstices in order to track this because it's a really complicated geometry. And really the only way you can get a hold of it is to do it in the sequence of time. So anybody who's curious about the astrology of our times, my website is handclow2012.com. And they can just go there, and it comes up 4 times a year. But right now, this harmonium is like moving into place, but also there's all kinds of really intense aspects that are like jazzing the energy in the third dimension, such as Neptune and Saturn going into Aries. Another thing that's really been jazzing us like crazy during the last 4 years is every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn come to a conjunction. And that in astrology is called a trigon. And then, so for every 20 years, there's a Jupiter-Saturn cycle that starts with the conjunction, which in this case, our case now, was the winter solstice, December 21st, 2020. And then what happens is 4 years later, Saturn comes to a square to Jupiter, or Jupiter comes to a square to Saturn. And then it comes to an opposition, and it comes to another square. And so when Jupiter and Saturn come to that first square cycle after that conjunction, which was August last summer, last December, and see if I get the third one. We've got one coming up here now. June 15th. We have one coming up June 15th. But whenever they come back to that square, that's when you get the realization of the really critical issues. And the really interesting thing to do with that is to look at when COVID broke out with the first Jupiter conjunct Saturn, December of 2020. And now we come up, now it's 4 years later, and all of a sudden with the first square, Robert Kennedy finally got a voice, even though he should have had a voice all the way through the whole thing. And then Robert Kennedy's voice intensified in December, because now we know that he's going to be part of the administration. And so like next June, what you're going to see is you're going to probably see a real revelation about the truth about what was going on with COVID. Now, that doesn't mean that current ideas are wrong. The problem with the whole COVID dynamic, it wouldn't have mattered what the subject matter was. What mattered was Suddenly, people in our reality cut off half of the dialogue and only allowed the media and the public to know about one side of the story. And that's been the reason I bring that up, Amrit, is because that's been very toxic for us. We have been used as human beings, we have been used to have the freedom to look if something happens, we can say, well, I don't think that's what happened. I think this is what happened. And all of a sudden, with this Trigon in December 2020, we entered into this weird zone of like, okay, you could talk about this, but not that. I got shut down 3 times during that period, because of this stuff. And so this first square cycle ending this June, we're going to have both sides of the story. And it's going to be a mixture. It's not going to be all that Anthony Fauci's the devil or anything like that. It's going to be a mixture of things. But we need to know these things, So what I'm trying to say is we're in the middle of this awakening where we're starting to get information on a really complicated level about really difficult issues. Certainly for me, the most difficult one is what's been done to children on this planet. I'm a mother of 4 and I can't stand it. But we're at the same time, we're seeing the truth about something so that we can change it. So it's this weird combination because this harmonium it's like almost like an angelic shell that's like comforting us. We're in the middle of this radical level of waking up.
Barbara, do you reflect on your incarnation sometimes and wonder what your soul signed up for to be incarnated in this particular time and the lessons and the mission that it's on?
Well, actually, where I'm really lucky is because of what I was learning from my grandfather, and that I was born during the depths of World War II and was abused as a small child, from age 1.5 to 3. And I don't mind mentioning that on air because I've written about it and I've healed from that completely. But once I hit my 40s, that's usually what'll happen is you keep the lid on till you're about 35 or 40, then you hit 40, and that's midlife crisis. So I did 100 past life regressions under hypnosis as a way to heal the childhood trauma and other stuff that was going on with me. So because of that, I have a really tactile sense. I turned it into a book called the Mayan Chronicles trilogy, which came out, and I told the story of my lifetimes going back 100,000 years. It's fascinating stuff. But I really, of course, obviously believe in reincarnation, and I believe those lifetimes were real, and they're a real part of me now. Now, somebody doesn't have to believe that to do regression therapy, but I do believe that.
It's interesting as well because I read somewhere you're experiencing yourself here on Earth, but also in past timelines, and then also in different star systems potentially, and feeling that your present self is informed by the other lives that you're lived/living. Is that a real-time experience or is it just a knowing? Can you describe that to us?
Well, actually what I discovered ultimately by going through all of that stuff was that all of those parts of me were still real now. Like I had a past life as a high priest in Egypt. And then you could say, well, that's ridiculous, But then I had another lifetime as a prostitute in the area where Syria is now. I had a whole range. And it's that range of experience that makes us what we are now. And so, as you can see, I'm kind of a complex person. My husband, Jerry, and I've been married for 52 years, and probably been only the last 10 years that he can stand almost anything that comes out of my mouth, But those are parts of me. And they have wisdom, and they frequently come forward and help me in this lifetime. They're inner voices,
Yeah, fascinating. One of the questions I wanted to ask about before was you mentioned the 9-dimensional teachings and string theory. I don't know enough about string theory. What are your high-level takes on string theory that you illuminate us with?
Well, of course, the only way that I could really understand string theory would be to be able to do mathematics at that level, which I can't. I can't do it. But it's exactly the same thing as the information in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. I even have a chapter where Witten developed a theory called brain theory, which is BRANE, which is not like brain, but like levels. And I compared the higher five dimensions to his theory on brain mathematics, and he had illustrations for it. So I took his illustrations and had my illustrator do some of ours. In other words, I can understand it in a kind of tactile way. And it's very similar to what came through me years ago that I'm still teaching. So you can't really, that's where the scientists kind of have us by the back of the neck, because I can't do calculations for string theory.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating to feel into when the information is coming through and what it means for us. There's a really interesting piece you said earlier. There are a lot of the teachings in the 3D right now that we need to understand. We didn't get an opportunity to double click on that. What are some of the more pertinent things in the 3D that you feel like we need to understand at this particular moment in time?
I really think, as far as the third dimension is concerned, that people should have an altar in their house or on their property that's oriented to the four directions. Because wherever you are on the planet, you're receiving energy from those four directions. So you need to make something that is in a circle so that you can sit in. And it can be a 4-foot wide circle. It doesn't have to be a big circle. Outdoors, you can have it be bigger. But what you want to do is you want to mark the directions, the north, south, east, and west. And you want to start watching the way the seasons change in relationship to the directions. And when you're in the middle of that circle, as you get used to meditating that way, you can sit in that circle and you can, let's say the north is right in front of you. You can tune into wise teachings from great guides. You can have a sense of the mother goddess and comfort and protection on the planet in the south. You can have a sense of entering into high spiritual levels and magical energy on the east, or you can have a sense of chaos and dismemberment on the west. And you start working with people do this naturally because they've actually been doing it for tens of thousands of years. They just don't realize it. And the reason for this is that it orients you on the planet in relationship to the Earth's core. And because you could go down in the center of the circle, down into the core. And that's where the Akashic records are. That's where the wisdom is. And the more it's just like any spiritual practice, the more you tune into it, the more it means to you. And then you gradually start noticing the way the sun changes from the equinox to the solstice, or from the you start noticing more things about the reality that you live in.
Yeah, truly fascinating. One of the interesting things I think is worth mentioning is, because I think people tuning into this particular conversation at this juncture will be, there are some people that run the risk of looking to understand the dimensions because they're challenged by the world that they're living in. And there's like this escapism frequency towards understanding more of the dimensionality, the multi-dimensionality of the human being, kind of going, oh, I'm more than what's here, and what's here is maybe not as important. What do you say to that?
Well, I thought about writing only the first 5 dimensions because from many points of view, you don't have to go beyond the 5th dimension. If you move your consciousness within 5 dimensions and you have an open heart, there's actually no need to get in touch with these other levels. But there's so much fun. And so one of the things that I advise when reading Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, if you get to a dimension like the 7th dimension, say, that for some reason is just really challenging or pushing your buttons or whatever, put the book away for a while. There's no hurry here. But I do believe opening up at these levels is what's going to bring us together and what's going to enable us to not have our future controlled by belief systems and forces that we don't agree to.
And I also found a body of your work saying that, hey, like the 3D is actually the way to access the other dimensions fully is to really honor where we are in the 3D and dive in even deeper into our 3D reality and existence, which seems somewhat counterintuitive in some ways.
Well, see, that's why you need to orient yourself in the third dimension. You need to start understanding exactly where you are. Because a lot of people walk around with no sense of being grounded or no sense of being connected at all. And as soon as you orient yourself, then you're grounded. And then you can start determining what you want to tune into.
Interestingly, at this particular juncture in the conversation, I can visualize an individual doing their work to sort of open up their multidimensionality. But then as more and more people start to do this, it becomes quite interesting because obviously we're used to occupying the 3D and with our conscious awareness and, you know, having conversations like you and I having here. I wonder what it looks like when we start opening up to our multidimensional nature and how even certain things as fundamental as communication start to shift. Like imagine if my 5D was talking to your 5D, and like, what does that look like? Do you know what I mean? Or is it already potentially happening?
We are talking to each other in 5D.
Tell us more about that then.
No, we are because I tuned in last night. I thought, okay, now who is this guy? So I went out into the etheric planes and immediately realized that we would have a heart connection, which we do. And, you know, it's kind of funny because in a way, the way we talk to each other is a little bit like simple children. You know what I mean?
Yes, I can feel that. Yeah.
And it just, as you go further, there's no question, moving into the sixth dimension and into real geometrical consciousness is a great challenge. And so Alchemy of Nine Dimensions has 2 chapters on crop circles because we have been privileged enough in our lifetime to be living on a planet where the sixth dimensional symbolic sacred geometry teachers have been imprinting the fields on Earth with sacred geometrical designs. So I was a crop circle researcher back in the 80s and actually learned how to communicate with the circle makers, which was really, and so I described that in detail because it is a challenge. And so a lot of people just go, okay, I'm willing to have unconditional love and I'm willing to spend my life learning compassion and caring and all that, but that's enough for me. And they're probably right. That's a very Eastern point of view, where the Westerners are the ones who tend to move into these higher dimensions because we tend to be so intellectual.
Talking about intellectual and the heart connection, what do you wish people understood more about the heart?
You know, as you probably know, I'm sure, once you start moving in there, you just move in deeper and deeper and deeper. And that even means, like in my case, I've had 4 children and 2 of them have died, unfortunately, the older ones. And you receive a great wound like that, and you go through tremendous grief and tremendous pain. And when you come out of it, your heart is even bigger, and it gets bigger and bigger. And that's just how it works. You know, imagine the geometry emanating from this planet as more and more people open the heart. It's an exquisite. Sometimes I see visions like that. They're really beautiful.
That's fascinating to feel into. Barbara, as we start to round out today's conversation, there is so much work that you have covered through all the various books, fact, fiction, man, so much stuff that you've contributed. There's a purpose to all of this. Obviously, your grandfather had an incredible role to play in your journey as well, and you're carrying on an entire lineage there. What is the most fundamental piece of wisdom that you think people really need to know in its greatest simplicity at this time?
This is a hard time to make a statement about that because we are in a time now of such confusion and such pain. And the only thing that seems to work for me is to keep stopping myself and sitting down or whatever and remembering to just trust. And the minute I move into trust and move in deep into trusting, I came here for a reason. I chose to be here, and I plan to be here for quite a while longer. Then what happens is the gratitude starts to come, because most of us have so much to be grateful for. And then once you move into gratitude and trust, it's easier to go through this. It's easier to go through this. This is hard. And this is also very crazy too. I mean, I'm of the generation where parents just stuck us in front of the TV so we could watch Walt Disney cartoons. Well, what's going on now is like a gigantic, intense Walt Disney cartoon. It's unbelievable. So therefore, you also really have to have a sense of humor. And I do a lot of laughing while I'm crying.
Do a lot of laughing while I'm
I'm just finally, okay, time to laugh.
Yeah. A little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down in some ways. Yeah. Oh, Barbara, there is so much ground still yet to be covered in today's conversation and podcast. There are links that you mentioned earlier. I will put them in the show notes below for the people to go check out in the description, especially some of the astrological stuff. Anything in particular you think people should be going to check out? Obviously, I'll put a link to the book, The Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, as well, in the show notes below as well. Anything in particular you think would be super supportive for people at this particular moment in time as well?
My grandfather gave me such a huge teaching that I took a tremendous number of books and creative projects and all that to bring it in. But it's here. And what's fun is if somebody gets excited about something, one part, they can move to another part. It's kind of a holistic creative pile.
I love that. Barbara, thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly and openly here with us today. I'm so grateful for the time spent together. And also, this, for those tuning in, is absolutely your life's work. And like you said, there's still plenty more to be done. You're an absolute elder in this space. And I really just have so much love and respect for you and the work you're doing. So thank you for the work. Thank you for the conversation. And also deeply, thank you for you. Yeah.
Thank you for the love, especially.
You inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Thank you so much for your inspirations to evolve. It is such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. To all of you that are subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for your incredible love and support. Like I say, everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. At the time of this recording, actually though, of return viewers that keep returning to the episodes, only 20% of you are actually subscribed. There's so many of you that are watching repeat episodes that haven't yet subscribed, touchwood, so please do take a moment. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, it helps with everything we're doing, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. So please, as I'm saying the word subscribe, the subscribe button below is lighting up in the colors of the inspired evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the movement. Help us on this path. On screen now, hand-selected by YouTube, conversations for you to dive in even deeper on your inspirations to evolve. So go on, take your pick, make your click, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay inspired, keep evolving, onwards, upwards, and in. See you there.